Okay, okay, let's see who's that Shishman is. These guys are mentioning that King Shishman of Bulgaria or something. I'm not aware of that history individual, historical individual. So let's see. King Shishman. Let's see, 1 second. Oh, I will put this music, but it will be significantly lower. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, King Shishman. King Shishman. Michael Shishman. So it's Mikhailo Shishman of Bulgaria. Michael Asen III. Mikhail Asen III. Ruled as Tsar of Bulgaria. Oh yeah, so Shishman was actually a really important figure in their history. I'm totally unaware of Bulgarian history, to be honest. So let's learn together. So he ruled since 1323 to 1330. What's that? Sorry, I don't know how to read the ages. It was like medieval Bulgaria. The exact years of his birth is unknown, but it was between this period that he was a founder of last ruling dynasty of the second Bulgarian empire. So Bulgarians had like multiple ages of empire, how to say, empiric era. First Bulgarian empire. Let's see what's the first Bulgarian empire. Oh, it's really old. It's 6th century. Okay. Language is Bulgarian. Religion, Tangrism, Slavic paganism, Orthodox Christianity. I am aware of Slavic paganism and Orthodox Christianity, of course, but I am really not aware of Tengrism. Let's see what that is. Tengrism, also known as Tengerism, Tengianism, is an ethnic Turco-Mongolic religion originating in Eurasian steppes, based on folk of shamanism and animism. So it's ancient cult, I would suggest, of thought, you know. Supreme deity Tengri. Tengri was their supreme being. Let's see. Polynesian god. So we see a Mongol heritage here, Mongol paganism we see in the ancient Bulgaria also. Yeah, interesting. Middle Turkic, Ottoman Turks, blah, blah, blah. Modern Mongolian. The oldest name, okay. So this is like the ancient paganism. Let's go back to the second Bulgarian Empire and Michael of Bulgaria, Michael Shishman of Bulgaria. Rise to throne. Oh, so he was waging war against Byzantium. That, for you who don't know, Byzantium is actually a Roman Empire, but it was concentrated in more in the east with the newer Christian tradition instead of pagan Rome before that. So with the fall of pagan Rome, there was also a rise of Christian era of Rome, and that was focused in Constantinople, the main city of Byzantium Empire, how to say. Okay, so their royalty also bred with ours. See, we have like few cases of nobles making marriages with Serbian noble families also. Relations with Serbia, the divorce with Ana Neda worsened the relations between Bulgaria and Serbia. Oh! Okay. Ancient history. Wallachia. So actually, he waged war with the Byzantine Empire. Just let me see. While his grandfather and rival Andronikos II obtained the support of Serbian king. According to, so we have intertwined history, medieval, even pre-medieval history altogether, you know, with Bulgarians. We often made pacts so we can wage war against Byzantium, which is that is one part of the history that is unclear to me, because how come we waged war so much against the Byzantium, but we at the same time appropriated so much of the symbols they used. That's like really strange. You know? I think that relationships within the Balkans between the Balkan states, city-states, and Byzantium was not that bloody, to be honest. I think that there was actually a more cooperation, cultural spreading, and Christianity in the Orthodox form, but it was also, how to say, positive cultural, economical, and spiritual, and whatever, you know, prosperity in both ways, only to be interrupted by a war here and there. That was probably the more correct, how to say that, insight into their relationships. Because let's not forget, that was the same type of culture we had with the Rome, the Byzantium Rome. Okay, let's continue with illustrating. I just wanted to see that. So where was I? So for you who are not aware, I'm not doing just an illustration here. This illustration of the church is only one element of the overall project that I'm trying to do, and that is a video, animated video called Studenica Transfiguration. So it's going to be animated video with a bunch of different elements. I also tried to contact multiple artists in the music sphere, and it's hard to get to them, so I'm going to see what I'm going to do about the soundtrack. Maybe at the end I will make it on my own, but I would love to include some other artists into this project, because I do not believe in how to say that, soloing the entire art stuff. I do like collaborations, and I would love to challenge myself further into collaborations, of course. And actually, this music that we're listening to, I would love to include it on the video, but I don't know how to get to that band. I need to find a contact, because there is no contact. Maybe on the Facebook page I need to also see, but the majority of the individuals are not actually using Facebook, so they may read that message like after 1 year or something, you know. Also, by the time I finish this this project, I will maybe try to dabble in more seriously into Patreon, because I want to reward the people that are included in this channel evolution, how to say. There is a small amount of us, but a really small amount, but hey. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you don't know what you are looking at, or do not understand any technical part of what I'm doing at the moment, feel free to ask always. I will be glad to answer it. Let's make a few corrections here. Yeah, I love this one. Yeah, music from Balkans, even the spiritual music, not only folklore, not only music of the people, but also of a faith, is really a good musical blend between East and West of that time, you know. That's why I love it. Okay, let's find some video about that teaches us a little bit about Bulgarian Empire. Bulgarian and documentary. The first Bulgarian Empire.
Hi, this is Eric Halsey, the creator of the Bulgarian History Podcast, and you're watching a special video documentary of the Byzantine Empire. Dominant state in Europe, one which gave the world the Cyrillic alphabet, helped define the later centuries of Byzantine history, and perhaps the most mysterious thing about this once powerful empire is its origin. How did Bulgaria come into being? One thing we do know, it began with that most human of tendencies, migration. Great migrations have been happening almost as long as there have been humans. The ones which began the story of the Bulgarians were no different. These began with the huge migration of the Slavs from their homeland, somewhere in modern Belarus, Ukraine, possibly Poland. From around the 6th century, they had settled in the Balkans, establishing themselves well within the boundaries of the Byzantine Empire. At this time, the Bulgars had a state of their own. Known as Old Great Bulgaria, this was one in a long line of states that the Bulgars had established during their centuries-long migration from a little understood homeland, likely in Central Asia. Old Great Bulgaria existed through modern Ukraine between the Dnieper and Don rivers, as well as most of the Caucasus Mountains. It began, as with so many steppe tribe confederations, with a man uniting several Bulgar tribes under his banner, in this case one Khan Kubrat. Kubrat took the ancient city of Phanagoria, perched on an island in the Straits of Kerch, which separate the Black Sea from the Sea of Azov. But this state would be short-lived. That great womb of nations, the seemingly endless sea of grasses which stretched from the territory of old Great Bulgaria for thousands of kilometers to the east, kept birthing new tribes which would sweep down from the steppe in search of a homeland of their own. The Bulgars were one of these tribes, but more were coming. This time it was the Khazars. Khan Kubrat may have urged his 5 sons to stay together, but he was now dead, and with overwhelming Khazar pressure coming from the east, the Bulgars resolved to take their own portions of the tribe and flee to the far corners of the world in search of a new homeland from around the year 668. Leading these groups were the sons of Kubrat. They traveled far and wide. Groups went to Khazar sons to Bulgars were one of these tribes, but more were coming. This time it was the Khazars. Khan Kubrat may have urged his 5 sons to stay together, but he was now dead, and with overwhelming Khazar pressure coming from the east, the Bulgars resolved to take their own portions of the tribe and flee to the far corners of the world in search of a new homeland from around the year 668. Leading these groups were the sons of Kubrat. They traveled far and wide. Groups went to Lake Van in Armenia, to the upper reaches of the Volga River, to around modern Venice, to southern Italy, to the Pannonian Plain, to the deep mountains of Macedonia, and finally, to the delta of the great Danube River. Some of these sons would establish their own Bulgar states. Others would see their tribes vanish and be incorporated into other great states. But only one would establish an empire. That son was Asparuch. He, along with tens of thousands of followers, entered the territory of the mighty Byzantine Empire. Far from the first or the last steppe tribe to do so, they were, however, one of only 2 tribes which would ever come out of the steppe and build a state that would last the test of time. In the year 680, these Bulgars fought at the Battle of Ongal against a Byzantine army sent to crush them. Neither army could have imagined that this was but the first of 45 major battles that they would fight over the next 6.5 centuries. The Byzantines certainly couldn't have imagined that their loss to the Bulgars on that marshy island would allow the establishment of a state which would help define the remainder of their history. The Bulgars then swept down into the Danubian plain, defeating the Byzantines again and forcing them to accept Bulgar presence. In 681, the Byzantines reluctantly signed a treaty recognizing the newly formed Bulgarian Khaganate and paying it annual tribute. Now, the new state faced a challenge. to establish itself as something more than another historical footnote, to build a lasting state, as so few steppe peoples had ever managed to do, and to do it all with a constant Byzantine menace, waiting patiently for the moment to destroy them once and for all. That meant building more than an empire. It meant building a nation, an identity which could withstand war, conquest, oppression, and indignities of all kinds. The Bulgars on their own simply weren't large enough to do this. Like their contemporaries, the Avars and the Khazars, they were a small elite which ruled over a large mass of foreigners. There's no country of the Avars or Khazars today for a reason. Both failed to forge a coherent nation, to become anything more than that ruling elite. But for the moment, there were wars to fight, territory to secure. The larger project of turning the Khaganate of the Bulgars into the Empire Bulgaria would have to wait. Bulgaria became a player in Byzantine politics almost right away. Within just 2 decades of the foundation of the state, Asparuch was dead, and his son was helping the exiled Byzantine Emperor Justinian II retake his throne in exchange for territory, gifts, and titles. Among these titles was Caesar, making the Bulgarian Khan the first foreign ruler to ever be given this Byzantine designation, as well as making him second only to the emperor himself in the hierarchy of Byzantine titles. But it wasn't all good feelings, as Justinian soon violated the peace agreement, leading to yet another catastrophic defeat for Byzantine arms at the First Battle of Anchialus. But just a few years later, the Byzantines found themselves in need of Bulgar assistance as a massive Arab army crossed into Europe and laid siege to Constantinople. In 2 large engagements, the Bulgars crushed the Arab armies at the walls of the city and put a halt to the advance of Islam into Europe for the next several centuries. Though it may not be as famous as the victory of the Franks at Tours, this was just as vital an engagement in the history of Europe. Soon after, the Bulgars once again played the role of emperor-maker in Constantinople, though less successfully. In any case, within a very short period, the Bulgars had managed to establish themselves as a powerful force on the Balkan Peninsula and integral to the ever-changing world of Byzantine politics. Following an intense early period, Bulgaria and Byzantium signed a peace treaty, and things would go quiet for several decades, with some brief intervals of mild fighting and a few raids here and there. But all of that ended in 755 when the peace treaty expired and war returned. The Byzantines were feeling confident as a result of their significant victory against the Arabs. Emperor Constantine V invaded, defeating the Bulgars at the First Battle of Marseille. But the Bulgars were resilient, and as the Byzantines made war on them year after year, winning many small victories, the Bulgars never relented. This continued until the Bulgarians managed to trap a Byzantine army in a mountain pass and completely destroy it, a tactic which would serve them well over the centuries. However, when the Khan decided to sue for peace, instead of continuing to take the fight to the enemy, he was murdered by his more warlike nobles who disagreed with his strategy. The next Khan, Telets, was also murdered following his disastrous defeat by the Byzantines at the Second Battle of Anchialus. This was a result of desertion on the part of the Bulgar Slavic infantry, once again highlighting the need to eventually merge the Bulgar nobility and its cavalry with that great mass of Slavs which made up the majority of the population. Khan Sabin, who took over from the murdered Telets, immediately made himself unpopular by secretly seeking peace with the Byzantines. When things got ugly, he fled to the Byzantine court and stayed there. The pattern which was developing was that the fierce independence of the Bulgar nobility demanded war, plunder, and victory over the Byzantines. The idea of making peace, or, in their words, becoming slaves to the Byzantines, was abhorrent to them. They were proud and entirely unwilling to compromise. That stubborn pride, however, made it quite difficult to run a young state in a complicated neighborhood. Military might couldn't save Bulgaria forever. Clever diplomacy was going to be necessary for them to survive. But for that to happen, the Khans were going to have to exert their power over their nobles, not the other way around. The next several Khans also faced rebellion and were either killed or fled to the Byzantine Empire. Now, during this period of chaos, the Byzantines had even managed to burn the Bulgar capital of Pliska to the ground. Clearly, internal divisions were bringing the young state closer and closer to destruction. What it needed was a strong leader. But that would take time, and meanwhile, war continued, losses mounted, and more Khans fled. It was only in the late 8th century, after decades of weak leadership and military defeats, that a Khan named Kardam came to the throne. Kardam took an aggressive policy, attacking the Byzantines before they could come to him. The result was a series of victories, which resulted in the signing of a peace treaty and the return of Byzantine tribute. But it was nothing compared to what was to come. Kardam had brought stability back to Bulgaria, stopped the bleeding caused by the weakness of his predecessors. Now, his successor, Krum, exploded onto the scene, doubling the size of the Bulgar state in just 11 years. He began by destroying the Avar Khaganate once and for all, taking enormous swaths of territory north of the Carpathians, as far north as Pest, half of modern Budapest. Within a year or two, Krum swerved around and attacked the Byzantines along the Struma Valley, taking the major city of Serdica, the city we now know as Sofia. The emperor was not amused, and responded by moving north and sacking the Bulgar capital at Pliska, taking immense amount of treasure and prisoners. However, on his way home, Krum had prepared an ambush in the mountains. When the trap closed, it was clear that the Byzantines had no way to escape the pass at Vrbica. The entire army, along with the emperor himself, perished there. It was one of the worst defeats the Byzantines had ever suffered, and the first time an emperor had been killed in battle since the Battle of Adrianople in 378. That Krum turned the fallen emperor's skull into a drinking cup only added to the shame. But that was only the beginning. Krum kept up the pressure, taking more and more Byzantine fortresses and pressing the emperor for a favorable peace. However, the Byzantines knew they couldn't accept peace in a situation like this. So they fought on. 2 more emperors were forced from their thrones by Krum's victories and relentless attacks. That is, until one Leo the Armenian came to power. This new emperor offered peace in an in-person meeting, but instead ambushed Krum with archers and tried unsuccessfully to kill him. Needless to say, Krum was furious and turned his anger into action. He plundered and took prisoners as never before and spent the winter preparing to take the ultimate prize, Constantinople. However, as he approached the final steps in his attack, he died and was succeeded by his son Omurtag, after a brief period of chaos in which several men took the reins of power. But his reign was about more than war. He also made significant progress in establishing a more stable and predictable state, something Bulgaria desperately needed, and that, in part, is Krum's legacy. Now, the country may have been exhausted, but Krum gave Bulgaria confidence and solid institutions on which it could rely. It was now just over 130 years since the country had been established, and it was finally on its way to becoming a respected player on the European stage. But Omertag knew Bulgaria needed to breathe, and so he signed a 30-year peace treaty and set about solidifying the progress his father had made, both in terms of territory and administrative reforms. While some fighting was necessary to put down rebellions of Slavic tribes, again reinforcing the idea that the formation of a cohesive Bulgarian identity and population was necessary, these 30 years were a period of internal work. Omertag gave the state more formal administrative structures. He also unified the army, eliminating the previous division between Bulgar cavalry and Slavic infantry. He rebuilt the capital as well as many border fortresses, and all of this contributed significantly to the forging of that identity I keep mentioning. Bulgaria was feeling less and less like a khaganate ruled by a warrior elite and more like a centrally governed European empire. However, this peaceful period came to an end when Omertag's son Malamir came to the throne. With the expiration of the peace treaty, war with Byzantium resumed. Malamir was successful in his fights with Byzantium, managing to annex Philippopolis, modern Plovdiv. But internal conflicts began to cause friction within the elite of the Bulgar state, namely Christianity. Several members of Malamir's family had converted, as well as many nobles. Embrace of or resistance to Christianity was emerging as a major point of conflict amongst them. Some saw Christianity as the truth faith, as well as a way for Bulgaria to truly join the ranks of major European powers. Others saw it as the fast track towards Byzantine cultural and ultimately military domination. Under the next Khan, Presyan, most of the major policy was determined by the sort of prime minister, a man named Izbul. The main development during Presyan's 16 years on the throne was the taking of significant territory in Macedonia. But tied in with that development was the consolidation of the Serbian Slavic tribes to the northwest. While the gradual coming together of a new state in the neighborhood must have been worrying for Presyan, that the Serbs decided to swear loyalty to the Byzantines made this development far more dangerous. Presyan tried to head off this threat by invading Serbia in 839, but the 3-year war only led to disaster, as the Serbian troops used the hilly terrain to their advantage and defeated the
Oh boy, you don't fuck with us, do you?
Bulgars at every turn. Still, Presyan managed to not lose any territory in this endeavor and left the state larger than he found it when he died in 852. His son, Boris I, however, would prove far more consequential. Now, Boris I is generally seen as one of the greatest leaders Bulgaria has ever seen, but his reign is full of contradictions. It certainly started off right, with him threatening the Byzantines into granting him a small amount of territory. This would, however, be the only territorial gain of his reign. Soon after, Boris became entangled in a war between Great Moravia.
Hey, I'm gonna make one larger break. I want to stretch out, and everything. And I'm gonna put some music, so see you in a bit.
Unity. You know that because you can't control yourself very well, which is one of Jung's objections to Nietzsche's idea that we could create our own values. So Jung didn't believe that, especially not after interacting with Freud, because he saw that human beings were affected by things that were deeply, deeply affected by things that were beyond their conscious control. And no one really knows how to conceptualize those things. You know, the cognitive psychologists think about them in some sense as computational machines. And the ancient people, I think, thought of them as gods, although it's more complex than that. Like rage would be a god. Mars, the god of rage, that's the thing that possesses you when you're angry. You know, it has a viewpoint and it says what it wants to say, and that might have very little to do with what you want to say when you're being sensible. And it doesn't just inhabit you, it inhabits everyone, and it lives forever, and it even inhabits animals. And so it's this transcendent psychological entity that inhabits the body politic like a thought inhabits the brain. That's one way of thinking about it. It's a very strange way of thinking, but it certainly has its merits. And those things, well, in some sense, those are deities, although it's not that simple. And so Jung got very interested in dreams and started to understand the relationship between dreams and myths, because he would see in his clients' dreams echoes of stories that he knew because he was deeply read in mythology. And then he started to believe that the dream was the birthplace of the myth, and that there was a continual interaction between the two processes, the dream and the story, and storytelling. And, well, you know, you tend to tell your dreams as stories when you remember them. And some people remember dreams all the time, like 2 or 3 a night. I've had clients like that, and they often have archetypal dreams that have very clear mythological structures. I think that's more the case with people who are creative, by the way, especially if they're a bit unstable at the time, because the dream tends to occupy the space of uncertainty and to concentrate on fleshing out the unknown reality before you get a real grip on it. So it's like the dream is the birthplace of thinking. That's a good way of thinking about it. And so because it's the birthplace of thinking, it's not that clear. It's doing its best to formulate something. That was Jung's notion, as opposed to Freud, who believed that there were sensors, internal sensors, that were hiding the dream's true message. That's not what Jung believed. He believed the dream was doing its best to express a reality that was still outside of fully articulated conscious comprehension. It was, because you think, look, a thought appears in your head, right? That's obvious. Bang, it's nothing you ever ask about. But what the hell does that mean? A thought appears in your head. What kind of ridiculous explanation is that? You know, it just doesn't help with anything. Where does it come from? Well, nowhere. It just appears in my head. Okay, well, that's not a very sophisticated explanation, as it turns out, you know? And so you might think that those thoughts that you think, well, where do they come from? Well, they're often someone else's thoughts, right? Someone long dead, that might be part of it, just like the words you use to think are utterances of people who've been long dead. And so you're informed by the spirit of your ancestors. That's one way of looking at it. And your motivations speak to you, and your emotions speak to you, and your body speaks to you. And it all does all that, at least in part, through the dream. And the dream is the birthplace of the fully articulated idea. They don't just come from nowhere fully fledged, right? They have a developmental origin, and God only knows how lengthy that origin is. Even to say something like, I am conscious, you know, that's taken... Chimpanzees don't say that. You know, it's been 7 million years since we broke from chimpanzees, something like that from the common ancestor. You know, they have no articulated knowledge at all. They have very little self-representation in some sense, and very little self-consciousness. And that's not the case with us at all. And we had to painstakingly figure all of this out during that, you know, 7 million year voyage. And I think some of that's represented and captured in some sense in these ancient stories, which I believe were part of, especially the oldest stories in Genesis, which is the stories we're going to start with, that that some of the archaic nature of the human being is encapsulated in those stories, and it's very, very instructive as far as I can tell. I can give you just a quick example. You know, there's an idea of sacrifice in the Old Testament, and it's pretty barbaric, you know. I mean, the story of Abraham and Isaac is a good example of that, because Abraham is called on to actually sacrifice his own son, which doesn't really seem like something that a reasonable God would ask you to do, right? And the God in the Old Testament is frequently cruel and arbitrary and demanding and paradoxical, and which is one of the things that really gives the book life, because it wasn't edited by a committee, you know, a committee that was concerned with not offending anyone, that's for sure. So Jung believed that the dream was the birthplace of thought. And I've been extending that idea, because one of the things I wondered about deeply was, you know, you have a dream and then someone interprets it. And you can argue about whether or not an interpretation is valid, just like you can argue about whether your interpretation of a novel or movie is valid, right? It's a very difficult thing to determine with any degree of accuracy, which counts in part for the postmodern critique. But my observation has been that people will present a dream, and sometimes we can extract out real useful information from it that the person didn't appear to know. You know, and they get a flash of insight, and to me that's a marker that we've stumbled on something that unites part of that person that wasn't united before. It pulls things together, which is often what a good story will do, or sometimes a good theory. You know, things snap together for you, and there's a little light goes on, and that's one of the markers that I've used for accuracy in dreams. And I know in my own family, when I was first married, you know, I'd have fights with my wife, arguments about this and that. And I'm fairly hot-headed, and so I'd get all puffed up and, you know, agitated about whatever we were arguing about, and she'd go to sleep, which was really annoying, you know, so annoying. Because I couldn't sleep, right? I was like chewing off my fingernails, and she'd be like sleeping peacefully beside me. It's like maddening. So, but often she'd have a dream, you know, and then the next morning she'd discuss it with me, and then we could unravel what was at the bottom of our argument. And that was unbelievably useful, even though it was extraordinarily aggravating. So you know, I was convinced by Jung. It looked to me like his ideas about the relationship between dreams and mythology and drama and literature made sense to me, and the relationship between that and art. I know this native carver, he's a Kwakwaka'wakw guy. He's carved a bunch of wooden sculptures, totem poles, and masks that I have in my house. And he's a very interesting person, not literate, not particularly literate, and really still steeped in this ancient 13,000-year-old tradition. He's an original language speaker. And the fact that he isn't literate has sort of left him with the mind of someone who's pre-literate. And pre-literate people aren't stupid, they're just not literate, so their brains are organized differently in many ways. And I've asked him about his intuition for his carvings, and he's told me that he dreams, like you've seen the Haida masks, you know what they look like. Well, his people are closely related to the Haida, so it's the same kind of style. He said he dreams in those animals and can remember his dreams, and he also talks to his grandparents who taught him how to carve in his dreams. Quite often, if he runs into a problem with carving, his grandparents will come and he'll talk to them, but he sees the creatures that he's going to carve living in an animated sense in his imagination. And I mean, it's not that difficult. First of all, I have no reason to disbelieve him. He's a very, very straightforward person, and he doesn't have the motivation or the guile, I would say, in some sense, to invent a story like that. There's just no reason he would possibly do it. I don't think he's told that many people about it. He thinks it's kind of crazy, you know. He said when he was a kid, he thought he was insane because he'd had those dreams all the time about these creatures and so forth. And so it wasn't something he was trumpeting. But I found it fascinating because I can see in him part of the manifestation of this unbroken tradition. We have no idea how traditions like that are really passed along for thousands and thousands of years, right? Part of it's oral and memory, part of it's acted out and dramatized, and then part of it's going to be imaginative. And people who aren't literate, they store information quite differently than we do. We don't remember anything. It's all written down in books, right? But if you're from an oral culture, especially if you're trained in that way, you have all of that information at hand both so you can speak it, you can tell the stories, and you really know them. And modern people don't really know what that's like anymore. I doubt if there's more than maybe 2 of you in the audience that could spout from memory like a 30-line poem. And poetry was written so that people could do that. That's why we have that form, is so that people could remember it and have it with them. And we don't do any of that anymore. Anyways, back to Jung. Jung was a great believer in the dream, and I noted that dreams will tell you things that you don't know. And then I thought, well, how the hell can that be? How in the world can something you think up tell you something you don't know? How does that make any sense? First of all, why don't you understand it? Why does it have to come forth in the form of the dream? It's like there's something going on inside you that you don't control, right? The dream happens to you just like life happens to you. I mean, there is the odd lucid dreamer who can, apply a certain amount of conscious control, but most of the time you're laying there asleep and this crazy complicated world manifests itself inside you, and you don't know how. You can't do it when you're awake. And you don't know what it means. It's like, what the hell is going on? And that's one of the things that's so damn frightening about the psychoanalysts, because you get this both from Freud and Jung, you really start to understand that there are things inside you that are happening that control you instead of the other way around. There's a bit of reciprocal control, but there's manifestations of spirits, so to speak, inside you that determine the manner in which you walk through life. And you don't control it. And what does? Is it random? There are people who have claimed that dreams are merely the consequence of random neuronal firing, which is a theory I think is absolutely absurd, because there's nothing random about dreams. They're very, very structured and very, very complex, and they're not like snow on a television screen or static on a radio. Like, those things are complicated. And then also I've seen so often that people have very coherent dreams that have a perfect narrative structure. They're fully developed in some sense, and so that theory just doesn't go anywhere with me. I just can't see that as useful at all. And so I'm more likely to take the phenomena seriously and say, well, there's something to dreams. Well, you dream of the future and then you try to make it into a reality. That seems to be an important thing. Or maybe you dream up a nightmare and try to make that into a reality, because people do that too if they're hell-bent on revenge, for example, and full of hatred and resentment. I mean, that manifests itself in terrible fantasies. Those are dreams, then people go act them out. These things are powerful, and whole nations can get caught up in collective dreams. That's what happened to the Nazis. That's what happened to Nazi Germany in the 1930s. It was an absolutely remarkable, amazing, horrific, destructive spectacle. And the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. The same thing happened in China. It's like, we have to take these things seriously, and try to understand what's going on. So Jung believed that the dream could contain more information than was yet articulated. You think artists do the same thing, like people go to museums and they look at paintings, Renaissance paintings or modern paintings, and they don't exactly know why they're there. I was in this room in New York. I don't remember which museum, but it was a room full of Renaissance art, great painters, the greatest painters, and thought maybe that room was worth $1 billion or something outrageous, because there was like 20 paintings in there, so priceless. And the first thing is, well, why are those paintings worth so much? And why is there a museum in the biggest city in the world devoted to them? And why do people from all over the world come and look at them? What the hell are those people doing? One of them was of the Assumption of Mary, beautifully painted, absolutely glowing work of art. And there's like 20 people standing in front of it looking at it. And you think, what are those people up to? They don't know. Why did they make a pilgrimage to New York to come and look at that painting? It's not like they know. Why is it worth so much? I mean, I know there's a status element to it too, but that begs the question, why do those items become such high status items? What is it about them that's so absolutely remarkable? Well, we're strange creatures. So I was trying to figure out in part, well, where did the information that's in the dream come from? Because it has to come from somewhere, and you could think about it as a revelation. Because it's like it springs out of the void and it's new knowledge and it's a revelation. You didn't produce it, it just appears. But one of the things I want to do with this series is, like, I'm scientifically minded and I'm quite a rational person, and I like to have an explanation for things that's rational and empirical before I look for any other kind of explanation. And I don't want to say that everything that's associated with divinity can be reduced in some manner to biology or to an evolutionary history or anything like that. But insofar as it's possible to do that reduction, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to leave the other phenomena floating in the air because they can't be pinned down. And in that category, I would put the category of mystical or religious experience, which we don't understand at all. So, artists observe one another. They observe people and they represent what they see and they transmit the message of what they see to us and they teach us to see. And we don't necessarily know what it is that we're learning from them. But we're learning something, or at least we're acting like we're learning something. We go to movies, we watch stories, we immerse ourselves in fiction constantly. That's an artistic production. And for many people,
okay, I'm back. I'm gonna dive in. What did Jordan Peterson said? I missed it all.
the world of the arts is a living world, and that's particularly true if you're a creative person. And it's the creative, artistic people that do move the knowledge of humanity forward, and they do that with their artistic productions first. They're on the edge, and the dancers do that, and the poets do that, and the visual artists do that, and the musicians do that, and we're not sure what they're doing. Like, we're not sure what musicians are doing. What the hell are they doing? Why do you like music? You know, it gives you a deep intimation of the significance of things. And no one questions it. You go to a concert, you're thrilled. It's a quasi-religious experience, particularly if the people really get themselves together and get the crowd moving. You know, there's something incredibly intense about it, but it makes no sense whatsoever. It's not an easy thing to understand. Music is deeply patterned, and patterned in layers, and I think that has something to do with it, because reality is patterned and deeply patterned in layers, and so I think music is representing reality in some fundamental way, and that we get into the sway of that and sort of participate in being, and that's part of what makes it such an uplifting experience. But we don't really know that's what we're doing. We just go do it, and it's nourishing for people, right? I mean, young people in particular, lots of them live for music. It's where they derive all their meaning, their cultural identity. Everything that's nourishing comes from their affiliation with their music and is part of their cultural identity. So that's an amazing thing. The question still remains, where does the information in dreams come from? And I think where it comes from is that we watch the patterns that everyone acts out. We've watched that forever, and we've got some representations of those patterns. That's part of our cultural history. That's what's embedded in stories, in fictional accounts of the story between good and evil, the bad guy and the good guy, and the romance. You know, these are canonical patterns of being for people, and they deeply affect us because they represent what it is that we will act out in the world. And then we flesh that out with the individual information we have about ourselves and other people. And so it's like there's waves of behavioral patterns that manifest themselves in the crowd across time. The great dramas are played on the crowd across time. And the artists watch that, and they get intimations of what that is, and they write it down and they tell us, and then we're a little clearer about what we're up to. You know, like a great dramatist like Shakespeare, let's say, we know that what he wrote is fiction, and then we say, well, fiction isn't true. But then you think, well, wait a minute, maybe it's true like numbers are true. You know, numbers are an abstraction from the underlying reality, but no one in their right mind would really think numbers aren't true. You could even make a case that the numbers are more real than the things that they represent, right? Because the abstraction is so insanely powerful. Once you have mathematics, you're just deadly. You can move the world with mathematics. And so it's not obvious that the abstraction is less real than the more concrete reality. And you take a work of fiction like Hamlet and you think, well, is that, it's not true because it's fiction. But then you think, wait a minute, what kind of explanation is that? Like, maybe it's more true than nonfiction, because it takes the story that needs to be told about you and the story that needs to be told about you and you and you and you, and abstracts that out and says, look, here's something that's a key part of the human experience as such, right? So it's an abstraction from this underlying noisy substrate, and people are affected by it because they see that the thing that's represented is part of the pattern of their being. That's the right way to think about it. And then with these old stories, these ancient stories, it seems to me like that process has been occurring for thousands of years. It's like we watched ourselves and we extracted out some stories. We imitated each other and we represented that in drama, and then we distilled the drama and we got a representation of the distillation, and then we did it again. And at the end of that process that took God only knows how long, I think some of these stories, they've traced fairy tales back 10,000 years, some fairy tales, in relatively unchanged form. And it certainly seems to me that the archaeological evidence, for example, suggests that the really old stories that the Bible begins with are at least that old and likely embedded in a prehistory that's far older than that. And you might think, well, how can you be so sure? And the answer to that in part is that cultures that don't change, like the ancient cultures, right? They didn't change as fast as us. They stay the same. That's the answer. So they keep their information moving generation to generation. That's how they stay the same. And so we know, again, in the archaeological record, there are records of rituals that have remained relatively unbroken for up to 20,000 years. It was discovered in caves in Japan that were set up for a particular kind of bear worship that was also characteristic of Western Europe. So these things can last for very long periods of time. We're watching each other act in the world. And then the question is, well, how long have we been watching each other? And the answer to that, in some sense, is, well, as long as there's been creatures with nervous systems. You know, that's a long time. You know, that's some hundreds of millions of years, perhaps longer than that. We've been watching each other, trying to figure out what we're up to across that entire span of time. And some of that knowledge is built right into our bodies, which is why we can dance with each other, for example, right? Because understanding isn't just something that you have as an abstraction. It's something that you act out, you know? That's what children are doing when they're learning to rough and tumble play, is they're learning to integrate their body with the body of someone else in a harmonious way, learning to cooperate and compete, and that's all instantiated right into their body. It's not abstract knowledge. They don't know that they're doing that. They're just doing it. And so we can even use our body as a representational platform. So we've been studying each other for a long time, abstracting out what is it that we're up to. And that's what is it we're up to? What should we be up to? That's even a more fundamental question. If you're going to live in the world and you're going to do it properly, what does properly mean? And how is it that you might go about that? Well, it's the right question, right? It's what everyone wants to know. How do you live in the world? Not what is the world made of? It's not the same question. How do you live in the world? It's the eternal question of human beings. And I guess we're the only species that has ever really asked that question, because all the other animals, they just go and do whatever they do. Not us. It's a question for us. We have to become aware of it. We have to be able to speak it. God only knows why. But that seems to be the situation. So we act. That acting is shaped by the world. That acting is shaped by society into something that we don't understand, but that we can model. We model it in our stories. We model it with our bodies. And that's where the dream gets its information. The dream is part of the process that's watching everything and then trying to formulate it and trying to say, well, trying to get the signal out from the noise and to portray it in dramatic form, because a dream is a little drama. And then you get the chance to talk about what that dream is. And then you have something like articulated knowledge at that point. And so the Bible, I would say, it exists in that space that's half into the dream and half into articulated knowledge. It's something like that. And going into it to find out what the stories are about can aid our self-understanding. And then the other issue is that if Nietzsche was correct, and if Dostoevsky or Jung was correct, and Dostoevsky as well, without the cornerstone that understanding provides, we're lost. And that's not good, because then we're susceptible to psychic pathology. That's psychological pathology. You know, the people who are adamant anti-religious thinkers seem to believe that if we abandoned our immersement in the underlying dream, that we'd all instantly become rationalists like Descartes or Bacon, or, you know, intelligent, clear-thinking, rational, scientific people. And I don't believe that for a moment, because I don't think there's any evidence for it. I think we would become so irrational so rapidly that the weirdest mysteries of Catholicism would seem positively rational by contrast. And I think that's already happening. So...
Okay, so this is my dogs are barking. This is this is where it gets to the point. The point is the thing he failed to deliver is that the main perception is there is something wrong, and humanity needs to look towards something. So he just says, hey, it's not all bullshit, there are some answers here, but he also does it with the twist of psychology and, books around it, how to say, and thinkers around it. It's interesting. His interpretation of these holy stories that you will listen to is really a different and fresh perspective, I'm not saying it's closer to the truth. No, it's a really materialistic point of view from his side, but still, it is based on the belief itself at the end. That's why I love it.
Okay. So this is the idea, essentially, that you have the unknown world. That's just what you don't know at all. That's the outside. That's the ocean that surrounds the island that you inhabit, something like that. It's chaos itself. And then you act in that world, and you act in ways you don't understand. There's more to your actions than you can understand. One of the things Jung said, I loved this when I first understood it, he said, everybody acts out a myth, but very few people know what their myth is. And you should know what your myth is, because it might be a tragedy. And maybe you don't want it to be. And that's really worth thinking about, because you have a pattern of behavior that characterizes you, and God only knows where you got it. Partly it's biological, partly it's from your parents, it's your unconscious assumptions, it's the way the philosophy of your society has shaped you, and it's aiming you somewhere. Well, is it aiming you somewhere you want to go? That's a good question. That's part of self-realization, We know we don't understand our actions. That's almost every argument you have with someone is about that. It's like, well, why did you do that? And you come up with some half-baked reasons why you did it. You're flailing around in the darkness, you try to give an account for yourself, but you can only do it partially. It's very, very difficult, because you're a complicated animal with the beginnings of an articulated mind, something like that, and you're just way more than you can handle. And all right, so you act things out, right? You act things out. And that's a kind of competence. And then you imagine what you act out, and you imagine what everyone else acts out. And so there's a tremendous amount of information in your action. And then that information is translated up into the dream and into art, into mythology and literature. And there's a tremendous amount of information in that. And then some of that is translated into articulated thought. And I'll give you a quick example of something like that. I think this is partly what happens in Exodus when Moses comes up with the law. He's wandering around with the Israelites forever in the desert, and they're like going left and going right and worshiping idols and like having a hell of a time and getting rebellious. And Moses goes up in the mountain, and he has this tremendous revelation sort of in the sight of God, and it illuminates him, and he comes down with the law. You think, well, Moses acted as a judge. I know this is a mythological story. Moses acted as a judge in the desert. He was continually mediating between people who were having problems, constantly trying to keep peace. And so what are you doing when you're trying to keep peace? Is you're trying to understand what peace is, right? You have to apply the principles. Well, what are the principles? Well, you don't know. The principles are whatever satisfies people enough to make peace. And maybe you do that 10,000 times, and then you get some sense of, oh, here's the principles that bring peace. And then one day it blasts into your consciousness like a revelation. Here's the rules that we're already acting out. Well, that's the 10 Commandments. They're there to begin with. And Moses comes forward and says, look, this is already basically what we're doing, but now it's codified, right? And Like, that's all a historical process that's condensed into a single story, but obviously that happened because we have written law, right? And that emerged in good legal systems. That emerges from the bottom up. That's English common law is exactly like that, right? It's single decisions that are predicated on principles that are then articulated and made into the body of law. And the body of law is something you act out. That's why it's a body of law. If you're a good citizen, you act out the body of law. And the body of law has principles. Okay, so the question is, there's principles that guide our behavior. What are those principles? Well, I think if you want the initial answer of what the archaic Israelites meant by God, that's something like what they meant. Now, it's not a good enough explanation, but look, imagine that you're a chimpanzee and you have a powerful, dominant figure at the pinnacle of your society. That represents power. Now, more than that, because it's not sheer physical prowess that keeps a chimp at the top of the hierarchy. It's much more complicated than that. But you could say, well, there's a principle that the dominant person manifests. And then you might say, well, that principle shines forth even more brightly if you know 10 people who are dominant, powerful. Then you can extract out what dominance means from that. You can extract out what power means from that. And then you can divorce the concept from the people. And we had to do that at some point because we can say power in a human context and we can imagine what that means, but it's divorced from any specific manifestation of power. Well, how the hell did we do that? Like, that's so complicated. If you're a chimp, the power is in another chimp. It's not some damn abstraction. Well, so the question is, think about it. We're in these hierarchies, many of them across centuries. We're trying to figure out what the guiding principle is. We're trying to extract out the core of the guiding principle. And we turn that into a representation of a pattern of being. Well, it's something like that. That's God. It's an abstracted ideal. And it's put in personified form. It manifests itself in personified form, but that's okay because what we're trying to get at is in some sense, the essence of what it means to be a properly functioning, properly social, and properly competent individual. We're trying to figure out what that means. You need an embodiment, you need an ideal that's abstracted that you could act out that would enable you to understand what that means. And that's what we've been driving at. So that's the first hypothesis in some sense. I'm going to go over some of the attributes of this abstracted ideal that we've formalized as God, but that's the first sort of hypothesis, is that a philosophical or moral ideal manifests itself first as a concrete pattern of behavior that's characteristic of a single individual. And then it's a set of individuals. And then it's an abstraction from that set. And then you have the abstraction. It's so important. So here's a political implication, for example. One of the debates, we might say, between early Christianity and the late Roman Empire was whether or not an emperor could be God, literally, right? To be deified, to be put in a temple. And you can see why that might happen, because that's someone at the pinnacle of a very steep hierarchy who has a tremendous amount of power and influence. But the Christian response to that was, never confuse the specific sovereign with the principle of sovereignty itself. It's brilliant. You see how difficult it is to come up with an idea like that, so that even the person who has the power is actually subordinate to something else. Subordinate to, let's call it a divine principle, for lack of a better word. So that even the king himself is subordinate to the principle. And we still believe that, because we believe that our president, our prime minister, is subordinate to the damn law, whatever the body of law, right? There's a principle inside that even the leader is subordinate to. And without that, you could argue you can't even have a civilized society, because your leader immediately turns into something that's transcendent and all-powerful. And I mean, that's certainly what happened in the Soviet Union, and what happened in Maoist China, and what happened in Nazi Germany, because there was nothing for the powerful to subordinate themselves to. You're supposed to be subordinate to God. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to tear that idea apart, but partly what it means is that You're subordinate, even if you're sovereign, to the principle of sovereignty itself. And then the question is, what the hell is the principle of sovereignty? And I could say, we have been working that out for a very long period of time. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about, because the ancient Mesopotamians and the ancient Egyptians had some very interesting, dramatic ideas about that. So, just for example, very briefly, there was a deity known as Marduk. And Marduk, he was a Mesopotamian deity. And imagine this is sort of what happened, is that as an empire grew out of the post-Ice Age, say 15,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, all these tribes came together, and these tribes each had their own deity, their own image of the ideal, but then they started to occupy the same territory, right? And so then one tribe had God A and one tribe had God B, and one could wipe the other one out, and then it would just be God A who wins, but that's not so good because, well, maybe you want to trade with those people, or maybe you don't want to lose half your population in a war, something like that. So then you have to have an argument about whose God is going to take priority, which ideal is going to take priority. And what seems to happen is that's represented in mythology as a battle of the gods in sort of celestial space, but from a practical perspective, it's more like an ongoing dialogue. You believe this, I believe this. You believe that, I believe this. How are we going to meld that together? So you take God A and you take God B, and maybe what you do is extract God C from them, and you say, well, God C now has the attributes of A and B, and then some other tribes come in, and then C takes them over too, and so you get, like with Marduk, for example, he has a multitude of names, 50 different names. Well, those are names, at least in part, of the subordinate gods that represented the tribes that came together to make the civilization. That's part of the process by which that abstracted ideal is abstracted. You think this is important, and it works because your tribe's alive, and you think this is important, and it works because your tribe is alive. And so we'll take the best of both if we can manage it, and extract out something that's even more abstract that covers both of us if we can do it. And one of the things that's really interesting about Marduk, I'll just give you a couple of his features, but he has eyes all the way around his head. He's elected by all the other gods to be king god, so that's the first thing. That's quite cool. And they elect him because they're facing a terrible threat, sort of like a flood and a monster combined, something like that. And Marduk basically says that if they elect him top god, then he'll go out and stop the flood monster, and they won't all get wiped out. It's a serious threat. It's chaos itself making its comeback. And so all the gods agree. And Marduk is a new manifestation. He's got eyes all the way around his head, and he speaks magic words. And then he also goes out, and when he fights this deity called Tiamat. And we need to know that because the word Tiamat is associated with the word Tehom, T-E-H-O-M, and Tehom is the chaos that God makes order out of at the beginning of time in Genesis. So it's linked very tightly to this story. And Marduk, with his eyes and his capacity to speak magic words, goes out to confront Tiamat, who's like a watery sea dragon, something like that. It's a classic St. George story. Go out and wreak havoc on the dragon. And he cuts her into pieces, and he makes the world out of her pieces. And that's the world that human beings live in. And the Mesopotamian emperor acted out Marduk. He was allowed to be emperor insofar as he was a good Marduk. And so that meant that he had eyes all the way around his head, and he could speak magic. He could speak properly. And so that we're starting to understand there at that point the essence of leadership, right? Because what's leadership? It's the capacity to see what the hell's in front of your face and maybe in every direction, and then the capacity to use your language properly in a transformative manner and to transform chaos into order. And God only knows how long it took the Mesopotamians to figure that out, and the best they could do is dramatize it, but it's staggeringly brilliant. You know, it's by no means obvious, and this chaos is a very strange thing, and this is the chaos that God wrestled with at the beginning of time. Chaos is it's half psychological and half real. There's no other way to really describe it. The chaos is what you encounter when you're thrown into deep confusion, right? When your world falls apart, when you encounter something that blows you into pieces, when your dreams die, when you're betrayed, it's the chaos that emerges. And the chaos is everything at once, and it's too much for you. And that's for sure. And it pulls you down into the underworld. And that's where the dragons are. And all you've got at that point is your capacity to bloody well keep your eyes open and to speak as carefully and clearly as you can. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll get through it that way and come out the other side. And it's taken people a very long time to figure that out. And it looks to me like the idea is erected on the platform of our ancient ancestors, maybe tens of millions of years ago, because we seem to represent that which disturbs us deeply using the same system that we use to represent like serpentile or other carnivorous predators. And we're biological creatures, right? So when we've formulated our capacity to abstract of strange...
Izvini, nisam vidio. Zaneo sam se I crtao. Evo me si, dobar. Kako je bilo po pola sata.
Capacity to abstract and use language. We still have all those underlying systems that were there when we were only animals. And we have to use those systems. They're part of the emotional and motivational architecture of our thinking. And part of the reason we can demonize our enemies who upset our axioms is because we perceive them as if they're carnivorous predators. We do it with the same system. And that's chaos itself, the thing that always threatens us, right? The snakes that came to the trees when we lived in them like 60 million years ago. It's the same damn systems. So the Marduk story is partly the story of using attention and language to confront those things that most threaten us. And some of those things are real world threats, but some of them are psychological threats, which are just as profound but far more abstract. But we use the same systems to represent them. It's why you freeze if you're frightened, right? You're a prey animal. You're like a rabbit. You've seen something that's going to eat you. You freeze. And that way you're paralyzed. You're turned to stone, which is what you do when you see a Medusa with a head full of snakes, right? You're turned to stone. You're paralyzed. And the reason you do that is because you're using the predator detection system to protect yourself. Your heart rate goes way up and you get ready to move. Things that upset us rely on that system. And then the Marduk story, for example, is the idea that if there are things that upset you, chaotic, terrible, serpentine, monstrous, underworld things that threaten you, the best thing to do is to open your eyes and get your speech organized and go out and confront the thing and make the world out of it. And it's staggering. When I read that story and started to understand it, just blew me away that it's such a profound idea, and we know it's true too, because we know in psychotherapy, for example, that you're much better off to confront your fears head on than you are to wait and let them find you. And so partly what you do if you're a psychotherapist is you help people break their fears into little pieces, the things that upset them, and then to encounter them one by one and master them. And so you're teaching this process of eternal mastery over the strange and chaotic world. And that all of that makes up some of the background. We haven't even got to the first sentence of the biblical stories yet. But all of that makes up the background. So you have to think that we've extracted this story, this strange collection of stories with all its errors and its repetitions and its peculiarities out of the entire history that we've been able to collect ideas. And it's the best we've been able to do. And I know there are other religious traditions. I'm not concerned about that at the moment because we can use this as an example, but it's the best we've been able to do. And what I'm hoping is that we can return to the stories in some sense with an open mind and see if there's something there that we actually need. And I hope that that will be the case. And as I said, I'll approach it as rationally as I possibly can. So, well, this is the idea to begin with, is we have the unknown as such, and then we act in it, like animals act. They act first. They don't think, they don't imagine, they act. And that's where we started. We started by acting. And then we started to be able to represent how we acted. And then we started to talk about how we represented how we acted. And that enabled us to tell stories, because that is what a story is. It's to tell about how you represent how you act. And so you know that because if you read a book, what happens? You read the book and images come to mind of the people in the book behaving, right? It's one step from acting it out. You don't act it out because you can abstract. You can represent action without having to act it out. It's an amazing thing, and that's part of the development of the prefrontal cortex. It's part of the capacity for human abstract thought, is that you can pull the behavior, the representation of the behavior, away from the behavior and manipulate the representation before you enact it.
Well, I'm having some issues with my stream is really laggy. It shows like it has latency like 1 minute until it comes to you, so I need to attend that as soon as possible. I kind of managed to figure it out on the last operating system I had, but I forgot how. I need to take a look at it once again.
That's why you think, is so that you can generate a pattern of action and test it out in a fictional world before you embody it and die because you're foolish, right? You let the representation die, not you, and that's why you think. And so that's partly what we're trying to do with these stories. What do I hope to accomplish? I hope to end this 12 lecture series knowing more than I did when I started. That's my goal, because I said that, you know, I'm not telling you what I know, I'm trying to figure things out, and this is part of the process by which I'm doing that. And so I'm doing my best to think on my feet. You know, I come prepared, but I'm trying to stay on the edge of my capacity to generate knowledge and to make this continually clearer and to get to the bottom of things. And so I'm hoping that that's what I want to accomplish. And it seems like people are interested in that. So then we're going to try to accomplish that together. And so that's the plan. And the idea is to see if there's something at the bottom of this amazing civilization that we've managed to construct that I think is in peril for a variety of reasons. And maybe if we understand it a little bit better, we won't be so prone just to throw the damn thing away, which I think would be a big mistake. And to throw it away because of resentment and hatred and bitterness and historical ignorance and jealousy and the desire for destruction and all of that. It's like, I don't want to go there. It's a bad idea to go there, and we need to be grounded better. And so, hopefully, well, we'll see how this works. All right, so how do I approach this? Well, first of all, I think in evolutionary terms. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the cosmos is 15 billion years old, and the world is 4.5 billion years old, and there's been life for 3.5 billion years, and there were creatures that had pretty developed nervous systems 300 to 600 million years ago, and we were living in trees as small mammals 60 million years ago, and we were down on the plains between 60 million and 7 million years ago, and that's about when we split from chimpanzees, and modern human beings seem to emerge about 150,000 years ago, and civilization pretty much after the last ice age, something after 15,000 years ago. Not very long ago at all, you know. And that's the span across which I want to understand. That's the span across which I want to understand. I want to understand why we are the way we are, looking at life in its continual complexity, right from the beginning of life itself. And there's some real utility in that because we share attributes with other animals, even animals as simple as crustaceans, for example, have nervous system properties that are very much like ours, and it's very much worth knowing that. And so I think in an evolutionary way, I think it's a grand and remarkable way to think because it has this incredible time span, right? It's this amazing, I mean, people at the end of the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, thought the world was about 6,000 years old. I mean, 15 billion years old, that's a lot more, right? It's a lot grander, it's a lot bigger, but it's also a lot more frightening and alienating in some sense, because the cosmos has become so vast, it's either easy for human beings to think of themselves as trivial specks on a trivial speck out some misbegotten hellhole end of the galaxy among hundreds of millions of galaxies, right? It's very easy to see yourself as nothing in that span of time, and that's a real challenge for people, and I think it's a mistake to think that way, because I think consciousness is far more than we think it is, but it's still something we have to grapple with. I'm a psychoanalytic thinker, and what that means is that I believe that people are collections of subpersonalities, and that those subpersonalities are alive. They're not machines. They have their viewpoint, they have their wants, they have their perceptions, they have their arguments, they have their emotions. They're like low-resolution representations of you. When you get angry, it's a very low-resolution representation of you. It only wants rage, or it only wants something to eat, or it only wants water, it only wants sex. It's you, but shrunk and focused in a specific direction. All those motivational systems are very, very ancient, very archaic, and very, very powerful. And they play a determining role in the manner in which we manifest ourselves. And as Freud pointed out with the id, we have to figure out how to take all those underlying animalistic motivations and emotions and civilize them in some way so that we can all live in the same general territory without tearing each other to shreds, which is maybe the...
I'm gonna make a small pause. See you in a bit. Anyway, that's all for today. Let me see. We are already 3.5 hours in. We did a lot of job today. We are in the final stage for this asset. I'm gonna finalize it in the next stream, and then we're gonna do background and some effects and try to incorporate later that into the After Effects. Anyway, thanks for watching and love you all.